Colombian unions and social movements resumed street protests on the 36th day of the national strike, demanding good faith negotiations with the government. In Ecuador, the National Teachers Union demonstrated in the capital Quito to defend the Intercultural Education Act after the Constitutional Court declared the legislation illegal. Mali's school leader and now interim president Assimi Goïta has named a new civilian prime minister after conducting a second coup in 9 months last week. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. Colombian unions and social movements resumed street protests this Wednesday, the 36th day of the national strike mobilizations, demanding good faith negotiations with the government. The mobilizations are motivated by widespread popular discontent. The government again refused to honor a memorandum of understanding reached with the strike committee in order to overcome a stalemate at the negotiating table. To facilitate the talks, protesters had lifted barricades in at least 40 points around the country, but President Duque replied demanding total clearance of all roads instead. All this amounts to bad faith, strike leaders said, and called for increased massive street protests. Presidents and directors of Latin American and Caribbean public media outlets, members of the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America, have voiced their condemnation of the U.S. sanctions against Cuba, as well as the brutal repression of protesters by state security forces in Colombia. At a virtual meeting, the media representatives decided to deploy a joint campaign in support of the resolution to be adopted on June 23rd by the UN General Assembly condemning the criminal unilateral coercive measures imposed by the United States against Cuba. In a statement, the group noted that these measures were intensified during the COVID-19 pandemic, with the purpose of blocking access to medicines, supplies, and equipment necessary to face the health emergency. Participants also rejected the brutal repression by the state security forces of Ivan Duque's government, conducting extrajudicial execution, arbitrary detentions, forced disappearances, rapes, and state and parastatal violence against protesters. They stressed concern that the Colombian media, both public and private, has purposely silenced the repression and distorted the motives of the protests and pledged in the exercise of freedom of press to show the truth of the event taking place in Colombia. Venezuela has condemned the Colombian government's decision to unilaterally reopen border crossings between the two countries, stressing the move seeks to distract public opinion from the internal problems of the neighboring country. Venezuelan authorities once again urged to establish bilateral coordination in terms of security, trade, and sanitary measures for an eventual agreed reopening of borders. They also stressed that the COVID-19 situation in Colombia presents a threat to Venezuela, which has implemented measures to control the spread of the virus. Venezuela also reminded the Colombian government that border issues must be resolved in compliance with international law, and that such unilateral decisions are only harmful to people living in border areas in both countries. During the electoral campaign in Peru, the agriculture sector has been promoted as a source of employment by both presidential candidates. The difference is that right-wing Keiko Fujimori proposes to boost agro-industry for export, while leftist Pedro Castillo promises a second agrarian reform. 1/3 of the Peruvian population makes a living from agricultural activities. Our correspondent Veronica Insausti brings us more details.
In Peru, out of a population of 33 million people, more than 9 million made their living from family farming. And since the pandemic began, 700,000 people have moved from the cities back to their hometowns in order to survive. While this sector is one of the country's major employment sources, it is also one of the most neglected by the state.
Budgetary resources are needed to provide credit to facilitate access to seeds for pest control within a larger budget for the Ministry of Agriculture and for agricultural credit, definitely, and on the other hand, It is a matter of policies, of creating institutions, of protecting the national market from subsidized imports from abroad, and to facilitate the partnership of producers themselves.
When the agrarian reform took place in 1970, farming communities were given land to cultivate, but without technological training or infrastructure support, and since then small farmers have been producing a minimum percentage of what could be achieved, according to specialist Carlos Paredes.
This is used for 3 months of the year when it rains. With technified irrigation, the benefits multiply to 12 months of the year. Then the families, with this new knowledge of the technologies in place, become the driving force of their own development and the development of the community, the district, the province, and rural Peru.
If the new government were to take on the productive technological innovation plan developed by farmers, communities, they assured that it would be able to guarantee food sovereignty in the Indian country.
1.8 billion soles a year, which end up here in Gloria, Alicorp, and fish canning companies. So there is an interest that poverty continues in order for big businesses to function, and the state is at the service of that, and that is why they do not commit to this. We, in the Farmers Confederation of Peru, have proposed a social investment fund for productive technological innovation of 1 billion soles, with which we would allow 143,000 families to implement these technologies plus water and sanitation.
In the last 3 decades, governments have failed to promote small and medium agriculture, leaving the development of agribusiness for export in the hands of multinationals, while the state must import most of the food of the basic food basket to ensure food delivery as part of social programs.
Verónica Insausti, TeleSUR, Peru.
And now we continue. A protest in the southern Mexican state of Puebla resulted in the arrest of 32 student teachers, increasing tensions between the local government and the students' union. The demonstration ended with repression, including blows of the fire and of tear gas by security forces. The protesters expressed their solidarity with students of another teaching school in the state of Chiapas after the repression they suffered on May 31st, which ended with the detention of 95 young people, mostly women who denounced sexual abuse by police officers. The current tensions have brought to mind the disappearance of the 43 student teachers of Ayotzinapa, a case that attracted international attention. Nicaraguan justice issued on Wednesday an arrest warrant against aspiring presidential candidate Maria Chamorro Barrios, who is charged with the crimes of abusive management and ideological falsehood. Judge of the 9th Criminal District of Managua hearing ordered the search and arrest of Cristiana Maria Chamorro Barrios, accused of the crimes of abusive management, ideological falsehood in the real competition with the crime of money laundering, property and assets to the detriment of the state. At the same time, Chamorro was disqualified from holding institutional and public office because she was not fully into her civil and political rights, and she was under an investigative criminal process. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back from the South. In Ecuador, the National Teachers Union called a rally outside the Constitutional Court and the government palace in the capital, Quito, to demonstrate against the suspension of the reform to the Intercultural Education Act. Teachers demanded the resumption of negotiations to carry out the reform of the legislation regarding the sector, after it was ruled illegal by the Constitutional Court. They stressed that the suspension of the reform makes it difficult for the Ministry of Finance to carry out its constitutional duties, putting at risk the labor rights of teachers across the country. Participants demanded that the Guillermo Lasso administration allow the law to be rewritten, at the same time criticized the executive's proposal to return to the on-site classes in the midst of the ongoing health crisis. They also called on the government to assign 6% of the national budget budget to the education sector, and for the reinstatement of teachers who were made redundant during the pandemic, as well as the right to retirement after 25 years of service. In the United States, the police fired live ammunition on a 12-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl. The girl was severely wounded. The children were shooting gunfire against police officers, local authorities said. According to Volusia County law enforcement sources, the children had escaped from a church home for orphaned youth and entered a vacant house where they armed themselves with a handgun, shotgun, and an AK-47 assault rifle. The police officers were reportedly met with gunfire where they attempted to surround the property. In attacking the children, the police fired several shots at the girl, who was taken later to hospital and underwent surgery. She is reportedly out of danger. Both children were charged with attempted first-degree murder of a police officer and armed burglary. The former International Monetary Fund chief, Rodrigo Rato, will stand trial in Spain facing corruption, money laundering, and tax dodging charges. Rato, who was found guilty in 2018 for embezzlement over the misuse of Bankia credit cards, is in a semi-release stage after serving half of a 4.5-year jail term. Last year, he was acquitted in a separate fraud trial over the listing of the bank in 2012. A judge from the Madrid court decided to initiate oral proceedings against Rato. Police are further investigating where the conservative politician's substantial financial assets came from. And a group of asylum seekers has been on hunger strike for 11 days in the Belgian capital as they seek a political response to their precarious situation. Since January 31st of this year, a church located on the central place Saint Catherine in Brussels has been occupied by the so-called undocumented migrants, who are demanding talks with the government and to be granted legal status in the country. Many have been living in Belgium for a long time and are calling for access to housing, health and education, as well as the right to work under legal conditions and not the situation of exploitation that most of them are in because of their lack of documents. The church has been occupied several times, and its priest is supportive of such protest. A hunger strike by 200 undocumented people in 2009 led to a move by the government to grant legal status to migrants, but since then there has been no progress on the issue.
Documented are ready to go to the end. As long as a solution has not been found for their situation, they will not stop their hunger strike. It is a message said over and over again. They started. They explained to us, verbatim, as long as we do not have, how shall I put it, a solution to our cause, they will not cease their hunger strike.
We are already dead, we are not alive, because we live like the others. We work, we have our accommodations, we pay the rent, we pay the charge. Our children study like the others. But we don't have a normal life like the others. This is why we are going on a hunger strike. We are workers, we are not slaves.
People, we are dying here. Every day there are 15, 20, like yesterday there were 18 ambulances. Today, since this morning, I heard that there were 10. The last one you saw it there now, 11. Until when will it stay like this?
According to Health Ministry reports, Colombia registered a new record for COVID-19 infections for the second consecutive day this Wednesday. The Ministry of Health and Social Protection reported 27,000 new cases, the highest number ever reported in a single day. 511 COVID-19 related were also registered. The country has now reported over 3.4 million confirmed cases. The government has been criticized for its failure to adopt measures to curb the spread of the virus and also support those financially hit by the pandemic. The coaches of Argentina and Chile's national soccer teams have expressed their concern after the Regional Football Confederation decided to hold the America Cup tournament in Brazil, apparently overlooking the fact that the country has the second highest COVID-19 death toll and third highest number of cases in the world.
Our perspective, because we were going to be at our own facilities most days, concentrated with our precautions. Now we are faced with this new situation which, frankly, is alarming and worrying because Brazil is honestly not the ideal place. In the end, it was decided that it shouldn't be played in Argentina for health reasons, for a logical reason, and it turns out that now we are going to Brazil. That's all there is to it, and surely Brazil is the same, or worse, or a little better in terms of conditions than us. From that point of view, it is a very difficult situation to digest. It changed giant risk to me, because for me, health comes first, by far. A few days ago we were going to play in one place. We had the games, the schedules sorted out. Now we are going to go to another place. I don't know if the schedules are going to change if we are going to play the same group. It's weird, as it seems to everyone.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Mali's coup leader and now interim president Assimi Goïta has named a new civilian prime minister after conducting a second coup in 9 months last week. Shogol Kokala Maiga's appointment was widely expected. He is the leader of the 5th June Rally of Patriotic Forces movement, the same group that took part in the overthrow of former President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta last year by young army officers led by Goïta following protests over perceived corruption. Last week, army officers upset with a government reshuffle that saw 2 military ministers replaced with civilians, detained the transitional president and prime minister before reporting they had resigned and releasing them. The transitional president asked for support for his choice of prime minister from the opposition M5 movement, a once powerful group which the military sidelined after the August 2020 coup. The African Union and the Economic Community of West African States have both suspended Mali and called for a return to a civilian rule. And Chad's new head of state, Mohamed Idriss Déby, the president of the Transitional Military Council who succeeded his father, Idriss Déby Itno, met with Angola's president, João Lourenço, during a visit to Luanda. Angolan Minister of Foreign Affairs, Tere Antonio, said during the meeting that their country has every interest on the stability of Chad, so we have to make sure that the power in Chad is embraced in order to contribute to the stability of the country. In addition, relations between the two countries have strengthened in areas such as oil, energy, transport, finance, and agriculture.
An unstable Chad will be a point of departure for the destabilization of our region, so we have expressed our support for the stability of Chad.
To help Chad face the challenge linked to the transition and the security challenge, regional organizations such as the African Union, sub-regional organizations such as the Lake Chad Basin Commission and the Economic Community of Central African States are each mobilizing at their own level to support Chad in overcoming its challenge.
Therefore,
Iran's President Hassan Rouhani said Wednesday that their nation's main issues with the U.S. have been resolved. Negotiations in Vienna have been underway since April to return Washington to the Iran nuclear deal and lift sanctions on Tehran, while also bringing Iran back into compliance with nuclear commitments it dropped in response to the U.S. unilateral sanctions.
The U.S. have been resolved during negotiations, with just some minor issues remaining that we will negotiate on and produce results. If there is the will that this be done in the current administration, then this administration has finished the work.
As the fifth round of talks in the Austrian capital on the rescue of the Iran nuclear deal drew to a close, the European Union envoy Enrique Mora, who is coordinating the negotiations, stressed he believes that an agreement will be reached at the next round of talks, starting next week.
We have just had a meeting of the Joint Commission to symbolically put an end to this fifth round of talks in these Vienna talks. And I say symbolically because we will continue working. We will reconvene next week. As coordinator, I had wished that this was the final round. That was not the case, but we will continue working, and I'm sure that the next round will be the one in which we will finally get a deal, and we will bring back the United States to the JCPOA and Iran to full implementation of its commitment, which is the objective that we are here.
The Israeli regime's opposition leader has officially told the country's president that he has reached agreements with political allies to form a new government. The announcement comes as several political forces have united despite their differences to unseat Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. About 35 minutes before a Wednesday midnight deadline, Yair Lapid told President Reuven Rivlin he had succeeded in forming a government. Lapid's main partner is Naftali Bennett, a staunch enemy of Palestine, who will serve as prime minister first under rotation between the two men. The move came after Mansour Abbas, the leader of the Islamist Rahman United Arab-led party, signed an agreement to support the coalition government at the last moment, a decision denounced by some analysts who stress the potential new government could make things worse for Palestinians. The head of the opposition and his partners now have 7 days to distribute government portfolios and to obtain the support of parliament. On Wednesday, a cargo ship full of chemicals sunk after nearly 2 weeks ablaze off the west coast of Sri Lanka, worsening fears of a major environmental disaster. The Sri Lankan and Indian navies worked jointly over the past few days in an attempt to put the fire out. The government has banned fishing, a crucial economic industry, along about 50 miles of coast in the wake of the incident. Authorities have also deployed hundreds of soldiers to clean affected beaches and warned residents not to touch the debris because it could be contaminated with harmful chemicals. Sri Lankan officials believe the fire was caused by nitric acid leak. The ship was carrying more than 1,000 containers, including 25 tons of the highly corrosive acid, which is used in the manufacture of fertilizers and explosives. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.